Man, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Mitchell. You're coming to us from Indianapolis?
In Indy, yeah, just wrapping up a year of teaching and getting ready to work on my project. I've been putting a lot of work and planning to. Summer is always great for professors so we can read what we want to read and get back to our own writing. So I am like super excited to travel to places and not tell people where I am and write in secret and get a bunch of poems written.
Clandestine,
yes.
Clandestine with the pen.
So it's a good time.
What does that process look like for you when you're trying to find, like a sort of space in secret to like hone in on your ideas? How do you go about that?
I think everybody has ritual. You know, if you're an artist, you kind of have, things you go through, a T-shirt of somebody you care about, a place that means something to you in terms of where you started or, where you make connections with other artists. So I'm always seeking those places out. So I just received a National Endowment for the Arts award. That's like, which freaked me out too, because
it's so amazing.
It's the funniest thing because people will be like, yeah, man, I had to hold this secret for months and I couldn't tell anybody and it was killing me. And we're like, just acting like nothing happened. So the award is for you to travel and research. And I'm like, I've got this huge project that I'm working on. Like for me, it's probably going to be one of the most difficult things I've ever written. Like no pressure, right? But I come up with this idea, and I'm like, okay, and I submit the proposal and some new poems, and so now I have this opportunity to be able to travel. And my fear is has always been, and I tell people this sometimes, is that as a poet, I don't want to keep writing the same poem over and over again. I want to do something new and different and challenging, because I don't want people to be like, well, okay, this is what he did in the last book. Like, why do this again? Which, I mean, I know you can relate to thinking about this Son Lux album, like, you don't want to be the same album over and over again, right? I mean, it's a very real, pressure. But the cool thing about that is, I think as an artist, is you never really know what you're going to produce when that pressure is on. Yeah. And some beautiful things can come out of that.
Oh yeah.
And it's happened with me before, I know personally, and I'm always like surprised by that. So at the same time, while I'm like scared to death to get to start this stuff, I'm also like, ooh, like I'm going here and I'm looking at looking at my schedule, like, getting these, appointments set up to, go through archives and stuff, and I'm just like, it's finally happening. So God. It's a good feeling, man. Yeah,
that's amazing. Are you how long has the planning been underway?
It's funny because I think good books, like each one, maybe they have their own kind of set amount of time, and so projects also kind of change too. Like, this is a thing that I always have to be mindful of, is that, this is something I've been thinking about for the past year, putting together, and actually it's turned into something totally different. And that time it took to rethink, I don't know if it was the pandemic or whatever, but that sometimes when you work on something for a longer period of time, it might start here, but then you have new experiences that it opens up to a totally different thing. And you're like, oh, like this is what it should be, right? Like, it's just like fate. I'm with my partner in Chicago, and we were supposed to go to this writing conference, and the pandemic hit, and we were just like, no, we're not doing that. So we went to Chicago to go visit friends, and went to the MCA, just great museum there. Yeah. And I saw this painting by this artist, and she sees me looking at this painting. I was like, no, this is it. So the project totally flipped, and I was like, this is where we're going. now, you know. We're like museum nerds, so like you know, like we laugh and say museums are our love language, you know. Like we'll pop up in a museum, probably see us looking at a painting like this together somewhere, but the whole project changed and I was so excited. And it's funny when stuff like that happens, because you're like, I was just going here because we love museums. We're going to Chicago. We got friends in Chicago. We're just going to hang out and visit them, you know. And right after that, you know, pandemic is, you know, full on and everybody is sequestered. But that trip just changed so many things. And so it's just, that's one of the things I think for me is fun about being an artist. Just those things that you don't know what's going to happen, but then you just like, you stumble into some new experience and it's like, oh, no, this is what it is now. And then you're like off following something else. And it's so much fun, man. So I'm really excited about where it's going. It's also weird because I have to be so like ridiculously secretive about things. So I mean, I'm fully aware that as I'm talking about things and I'm excited, it's like, you are so ridiculous. You're so cryptic. Like, like, what are you going to write about? I'm going to write about stuff and I'll put this stuff together, you know.
There are going to be things in here.
You're going to hear about them in a little while. I mean, you know, I hate that I have to do that, but it's also like,
well aware and acquainted with that feeling.
It's like you're not leaking an album to anybody before release date. So I know you understand that fully. Yeah,
very much so. But you mentioned something that I wanted to kind of zero in on. So you were talking about like, you know, going to places that may have had significance to you, you know, at some time. And that's something that I like have also had some experiences, either like intentionally seeking those places out or just like stumbling upon them, you know. And it's really interesting like how that can affect you, like to be like embodied back in a space that like only existed in your mind for so long, you know. And I find that like oftentimes in that situation I'm like evaluating or taking stock of, on some sense, like the difference that's there between the version of, you know, the place that existed inside of me and the version of it that actually exists out in the world, you know.
Right.
And like the echoes of what happened there that are perceptible to me that you know, are like you know, as you find yourself in the space, you can see that they've completely dissipated in most cases.
Right. It's like, and it's just not really the same thing, right?
Yeah. But that memory can be so strong and so, you know, I don't know that it's always inviting for me. Sometimes it's really painful, you know, but there's an inspiration that comes from channeling that, you know, or like sitting with and processing that and sort of like updating yourself on where things stand since, you know, whatever transpired in that space might have taken place. And I'm just curious to know more about what kind of significance and resonance those sorts of places have for you and how they inform your work.
Well, that's part of it too, right? Like you said, like sometimes you go back and things aren't exactly as you see them. Because I know, thinking about, you know, like, you know, from childhood, it's funny to go back to these places and you remember them so differently. Like it was almost like, you know, like you felt so small in the space, like it was just like hovering above you, and you go back and, you know, your position is a little bit different. Your perspective is different. I started writing in the Midwest in Iowa City. And of course, Iowa and the Writers Workshop is known as, you know, one of the famous writing programs. And it's funny because like I didn't go to that program. I went to Indiana and Bloomington, like Ryan did. But it was there where I started to write. And being in Iowa City for me is just like it reminds me of all these, you know, of all these things of really becoming an artist. And, you know, having these really tight friendships and discovering punk and, you know, having that be like this thing where like, you know, like, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do. So um, it's kind of like reconnecting to what started it all, right? And Iowa City is so much different, than I remember it. But it's fun to go back and see how much has changed. But then you still get this feeling like, oh yeah, like I remember, I've gone back to my last school I went to and got an embarrassing yearbook with a picture of me when I was just starting to be a poet, which is crazy.
I think now that you mentioned that, we're gonna have to get Chris to like Photoshop it onto the screen so that everybody that's watching the video version of this can see it.
The school will never be mentioned. I have the yearbook, but it's just kind of like, man, it's like I'm looking at young 13-year-old me poet. Like this is the beginning. So it's, and here's where I mess up. This is supposed to be my secret place of inspiration, right? I promised myself like I was going to sneak back to Iowa City at times and write, So now I've just blown my cover. So I'll be staying under an assumed name somewhere and try to pretend, so no one can find me. But it's just, it means so much to me. And I finally figured out, like my family's from the South. My grandparents were from Selma and moved to Louisville, Kentucky. So for a long time, I was involved in writing movements that were involved with the South. But then I thought about it, like I started writing in the Midwest, right? Like I started writing in Iowa. Like I am, at my heart, I'm a Midwest writer. So now I have to think about that perspective. Like, what does that look like? I've been in Indianapolis now since 2006. It's like, okay, I started writing in Iowa. Like, what does that mean, right? So I've got to be aware of that and be ready to talk about that and respond to that. So that's been kind of fun too for me to change that perspective and follow new things with my writing.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I mean, and there's some reality in which like all of those perspectives are, like very much a part of who we all are, and it's always like interesting as an outsider to see how different vantage points like sort of become the like primary, like I had this one experience. Son Lux was playing at Iceland Airwaves, the music festival in Reykjavik, like probably 5 years ago now. And I had spent some time out there working with some really great musicians prior to joining the band, actually. And so it was like a big reunion with all those folks, and we were all out to dinner somewhere, and there were these this musician Jamie McVinney. He's a really great organist, and I knew him a little bit. And there was this viola da gamba player, which is like sort of like this like Baroque instrument that looks like a cello, but it has frets on it, and it kind of has this like really like it can have this very bright kind of cutting sound when it wants to, but it's also like really it's a really cool instrument. But this guy Liam Byrne, who plays that, and they were both sitting there and they were talking like, on one side of me, and I was having a conversation on this side. And I'm from North Carolina, and so like, I'm just having my talk with somebody else, and all of a sudden I hear Liam, who's been speaking this entire time in a British accent, say like something about North Carolina, and I was like, wait a minute, hold on, like, excuse me, what? And so we started talking, and it turns out that Liam went to my high school.
No way,
like he's
man.
From North Carolina. He's, I don't know, maybe like, I don't know how old he is, but we had the same music theory teacher, like,
get out of here.
Like we, but I would have never been able to tell from talking to him unless he said that out loud. Like I would have never been able to guess that he, like, of all the people at the table, like, was the most familiar with where I was coming from.
And he went around the world to
and it was
meet
like
that person. Wow,
and like here we are sitting there like having this conversation. So, but yeah, I mean, and he hadn't been there that long, but I think that there is a thing I get the sense from people who have spent time out there that people are kind of like, if you don't change the way you talk, if you live here, you know, if you live here and you don't change the way you talk, then we're going to make fun of you until you do, you know, like, so
you just cut it off.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, wow. You know, I've never seen an example of it that was quite that dramatic, but like, even with my own way of speaking, I feel like it changes, like when I speak to somebody else who's from the South, like my own voice, like goes back to some version of like how I would talk when I was down there. And I realize in that moment that I don't talk like that quite the same way up here, you know?
So what is, I mean, in your Southern experience, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you think, how does that find its way into your music, to your art?
I mean, I feel like it's actually like, I was really identifying with a lot of what you were saying about like going back to Iowa City as like a place where you draw inspiration. I've had similar experiences going back to Raleigh and Durham and like kind of being
my best
around
friend,
there.
I think my best friend was from Raleigh and moved to Iowa City. Which is,
wow.
It's weird.
All right, man. Well, here we are. But you know, like there's a certain kind of, for me, there's like a lot of what animates my, you know, or gives rise to my creative work and process is like, it's sort of like arose as like almost a form of therapy. I've realized like of just like piecing together what it meant to like be somebody like me growing up in the place that I grew up and like not quite knowing what all the dynamics were and not being able to look to a prior generation to like see an example of what, you know, and I think there was a lot of just like, among other things, a lot of realizing that like process of becoming, you know, can be a sort of active one, and that there are, you know, there's like a way of moving through the world in which you are reactive and you know, internalize the assumptions around you and sort of like, you know, act those out basically. And then there's another way of doing it where you kind of make your own decisions, you know? And for me, that was kind of, it felt more like it wasn't really a choice, you know, and it was just like, okay, well, there isn't a good example. So you might as well, you know,
do your own thing.
Yeah, you've got to figure it out for yourself. And, you know, I won't say that was the healthiest thing in every aspect of my life, but it certainly like pushed me in a certain direction with art, you know, because that sort of like questioning the underlying tendencies and, you know, the structures that like are so predominant that they're assumed, you know, and kind of being more active in the way that we deal with those things, which, you know, that actually kind of takes me into this next area that I'm curious to ask you about, which is, you know, the construction of frameworks in which to express, you know, in which the flow happens, you know, like there's like, I know from talking to you and also from reading your work and, you know, just understanding a bit more like that there are different formal structures that you've kind of created for yourself over time. There was, you know, we talked about it a bit when you showed us the Voyager triptych, which is amazing. Like that, you know, for anybody who gets to see that, I just like was so thrilled about it. And it, as you were explaining to us how you approached it, the consideration around form and the sort of active, like you were like, I'm going to impose a structure on this, but this structure is one that I have thought through and developed, and it's a skeleton that I like built piece by piece, you know,
Yeah.
And I know that you've worked with the fret in the past, and you know, and so I was wondering if you could talk about your sort of more active way of creating the sort of framework on which like the, you know, the magic hangs. Like,
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. I think going back to the idea of not wanting to repeat myself in the books that I write, I came up with this idea early on that I was going to create a form, a poetic form with each book that I wrote. So I've got 3 books. And the first book, it was having alternate takes. I was writing a book of persona poems about Donny Hathaway. It was one of my favorite musicians. And so I was like, what if I have poems that are like an album that you hear and you go back and there's, you know, multiple takes of one song, you know, which is great when you know, jazz albums are always doing that.
Oh, yeah.
So the next time the poem comes back in the alternate take, you get a little bit of new information. It's like someone's improvisation that goes in a different direction, right? Which is why we have those alternate takes together, but you listen to both of them, you're like, wow, you know, you're glad to have both. So that was fun. That was a form that felt like it was right for a book about a musician. My second book was more autobiographical poems. It's called Black Alphabet. And that's where I created the fret. Like I said, my grandparents grew up in Selma. I had a grandfather who worked with his brothers that were sharecroppers. And I was like, okay, look, I'm Black, I'm from the South. I know everybody has written all these sharecropping poems, and I know people are going to have this critique. This is me thinking about people critiquing me before stuff is even written, right? So I'm like, I'm going to write a form that instead of, you know, giving you something, you know, to tear down before it happens, I'm going to create a form that talks about struggle, and it's based on the blues in the sense that it's around the form of a guitar. So when you see the poem, it looks like 6 lines that start with, you know, the names of strings E, A, D, G, B, E, and goes down like that. And each line starts with, you know, the name of the string, a word that begins that. And you can see these visual kind of caesuras, these pauses on the page, and it looks like frets and separation. So I did a series of those poems about my grandparent, you know, about my grandfather. I was like, okay, you know, that makes sense, you know, to me. So here's the funny thing. Because you guys gave me this great opportunity to write this poem, I'm like, I'm going to use my form and I'm going to use it for your poem. I start drafting and I go, it's not working. So I was like, stop. Like, so this is where I have to ego check. I have to put my form to the side. And then I thought, I've always, you know, I've got friends that write good contrapuntals. You know, you see these poems that are side by side, and you can read it down each column, and you can also read it across. And then I was like, well, what if I do a triptych? You know, you guys are doing 3 albums, because I really feel like this is why I felt so great about being involved in this, because I really thought you were thinking about this like poets. Why don't I do a poem where each column is a poem, but you can also read it across? And so I was like, that gave it more complexity to me in terms of the way that you guys went about the project, and it felt right. And so I was pleased with the results. I'm glad you guys were pleased with that too.
Oh, yeah,
I was
that's amazing.
You know, listening to all the albums, but really getting stuck on the third so much, and listen to a lot of that, and finishing that up. And I was like, okay, this is what it needs to be. So, you know, Amiri Baraka said a long time ago that he would never write a poem. He would never write a sonnet. He's like, you know, like a poem doesn't, you know, he's like, a poem doesn't need to be a form. You know, it's more important about what it sounds like and what you sound like. And so I feel like if you're going to use a form, better have a reason for using that form. So somebody doesn't look at it and go, that doesn't make any sense. And that's the end of the engagement, right? Yeah. So,
no, and it's, I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is that like you know, there's clearly like this active kind of imposition of this thing as a, it's not a cage, it's a,
Right.
like a stepping stone, or like a, like a pedestal for something to sit on top of or to hang off of or something.
Yeah.
And there is always that thing, like there's always the thing where like, if there's a frame that can provide context, then you can
Yeah.
see something exploding out of it, like, whereas without that, without context, there's no, we don't perceive boundaries as well. And
Right.
so we don't perceive them being broken
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just curious, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any particular favorite alternate takes, like
Whew.
off of different records? Like,
That's a good question. Make me for hoping I'm not forgetting some of these. I'm trying to think of. I keep going back to. I'm thinking about Coltrane. I think
I was also thinking about Coltrane.
because there's so many different ones, but now I hate that the song is escaping me. It's weird though, because sometimes I like McCoy Tyner's version of his stuff too. They're just like, and then with the piano it's so much different. Something else is happening. You just kind of go like, I mean, I love, McCoy Tyner.
Me too.
I think in my mind, like I want to be I'm the imaginary jazz pianist. That's what I really want to be. Of course, I'm gonna remember the song like after. But those are the opportunities, right? Especially it's like there's just, and I'm glad we're getting those lost albums. Which kind of blows my mind. Like these guys were so busy that they recorded whole really good albums and forgot about them. Like what? Like really? But it's just like that work ethic, man, is it's something else. I appreciate that.
Man, there is this one that I was stuck on for a really long time, and I'm gonna have to go back and find it, but it was off of a recently released Monk record, and it was an alternate take where he's like, you can hear him teaching the drummer the part that he wants him to play, and it's basically like what we would perceive as like almost like a just like backbeat kind of thing, but at the time that was like way more unusual than it is now, and like the drummer is just like not getting the like, like it's just like he's like, no, you got to play it like this, and he's like, yeah, but if I play here and you play here, then those two things aren't lining up, and he's like, yeah, that's the point, like
that's the
play
point.
It there, like it's like kind of, I mean, it's honestly hard for me to tell like what's being said, but like more just like the intention of it and like hearing them because they're playing while the back and forth is happening. And just like hearing how he's like putting the stuff where he wants it to go is, and like
just having that documented. That's a treasure, man. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, even as I know that I would like never want anybody going through my laundry like that. Like there are so many things that I would not want anybody to ever hear. And I feel like in the digital age, it's like the version of that is so different now, like we have just a lot of little like ideas and things that are completely devoid of any kind of personal context, you can't
have stuff floating around. I dare I say it, I love Prince. And I just wonder, I wonder about, we always wonder about things that are released. That's kind of like me thinking about like if you found the beginning of a poem and it was never published that way, and I was like, you weren't meant to see that. Like there's a reason why there's vaults,
right? Yeah,
of unreleased material.
Totally.
And I'm like, Prince knew the kind of artist he wanted to be and what he wanted to show. And if he didn't release it, like that, that means something, you know.
Yeah.
Not to dump on the estate of Prince, but you know, we're all like, you know, if you love Prince, you're wondering like, should that happen? Yeah.
Like for me, it's Jimi Hendrix, and like every time they go to release a new Hendrix record, at this point, I'm just like, don't do it. Like, don't do. Just leave him alone. Like you know, we have so much to unpack forever. Like
already,
we're okay.
Seriously,
we don't need to be greedy. Like
seriously. Speaking of which, like Electric Ladyland, like makes me think. Like, you know, I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, why don't I have this on vinyl yet? Like, I'm thinking of stuff I think about.
I also do not have that on vinyl, but man, that first actual song on the like. Have you ever been to Electric Ladyland? Is like one of the greatest pieces of music ever, I think, and I cannot believe that it's not more widely like just like that people don't know that song. Like, it's
interesting to me that like I love Hiatus Coyote, and so I'm glad they're coming back. But like Napalm did the cover of Electric Ladyland, which was just like, this is like, you're covering Hendrix. And like, I mean, to even get to the point where you're doing that, but I mean, I love the way that she did it.
Oh man, now I'm intrigued. I haven't heard it.
It's like she did that solo album that was just beautiful.
I heard really good things about that. I haven't heard it.
And I just love that. She's got a song called Haiku where every verse is a haiku. I'm like, come on now. I like, you know, I'm a sucker. Like, for like, the poet is being reeled in. Like, like, yeah, it's good. So I'm glad to see them back too, especially all the stuff she's been through and, you know, health. I just like, you know, this is like when you get to this time and you see, you know, artists that are so, they've been so brave with the things that they've done, and they're, you know, like this time of year, right? You know, what's being released, and you're talking about, you know, you guys and touring, and, you know, also releasing things and touring, and there's all these, you know, this is just such a fun time of the year. I think for me, I think we're all just kind of like, what are we gonna do now? You know, like we're ready to go. So just watching all this happen, it's just like, man, it's good energy.
Yeah, no, it's I feel like there's, you know, this moment for everybody's like looking, it's like the like I feel like it's like the part in like superhero movies or something where you like look and you're like, wait a minute, I have another shot. Like, I'm still here. Like,
I can do this.
Everything was, you know, like for those of us who are fortunate enough, everything was like somewhat felt frozen, you know, like if you're lucky, like that's what it was, you know, and like,
man.
It's like, okay, I'm unstuck now. Like, what can I do? You know? And, but yeah, like, it's definitely, I mean, there's so many things to consider in terms of just like the different rates at which that is going for people. And like, I think, you know, they're like, you're talking about musicians and stuff like that. And like, it's been amazing to see like people coming back, but also I know that there are a lot of people who like aren't going to be able to come back or like have had to move on to other things, at least in terms of like what they're doing to make a living and stuff like that. And so, I mean, like for anybody out there listening and thinking about this, like artists need your support right now in every field, you know, and there are a lot of people out there who are not in a position where they can just get back to it, you know, and this year has been hard enough for a lot of folks. So consider that in the way that you move through the world, I guess. But I wanted to ask you one more question, which is about something that you, a sort of technique that you employed in the that article that you wrote for Salon last summer, where you had revisions like within the piece, you know, speaking of like alternate takes and like, you know, and it was this, I was laughing out loud when I saw the first one because it was just so you just dropped it. Like you were like, it was amazing when this person revised their work in front of us. And I was like thinking about it as I was reading it, and I was like, wow, that's so profound that somebody would like just, be like changing their work, to give listeners context that this was a poet. Who was the poet?
It was Lee Young Lee.
Yeah. So Lee Young Lee was doing a reading that you attended, and as that was happening, like works were just being revised on stage in front of you. And just like, I feel like you like correctly called out how brave and, inspiring that was. And then you immediately proceeded to do it in the article.
I mean, it's like, it's like if anybody's going to do that, Lee Young Lee, definitely, who I respect so much, but also like too, it's like, it's your work.
Yeah.
Like it's yours, so if you're not going to do it and stand up for it, like who else,
Yeah. But I was curious like about how, because it felt to me in reading that piece that you were employing that, and I hate to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it, but, I will say that you employ it in a very intentional way. And it feels like this kind of like breaking the fourth wall sort of thing, And I was curious about like what your thinking was behind that, or, like what animated the decision to make that choice, and what you kind of like, I hate to use like words like what you thought it would accomplish or something like that, but like how you thought it would communicate it, or how it would communicate, maybe is a better way of putting it.
That's a good question. I feel like that revision and what I was getting from Lee Young Lee in that moment, and we've been there. You might hear a part on the album and you're thinking about, what if I had played it this way? I'm looking at a poem.
Every part on that.
So we have the same issue. Looking at a poem that's already been published, and you're like, when I read it, I'm taking this part out. Mm-hmm. So it's that moment of communication where you're like, this is something so difficult that's happening right now. I'm having a hard time expressing it. I want you to see how difficult it is for me to express it. Mm-hmm. I was, the Salon articles, when all these things started happening in this really, really tight, time span with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. Yeah. So Breonna Taylor for me is personal. This happened in a place where, my family is, and I worry about them because of something like that. And I wanted to go, as soon as we, heard about things happening in DC and movements, and especially with, that clearing of the path to the church across the street of the nameless person. I'm not even gonna bring that energy in here. It was just like, I want to go to DC. My partner and I drove to DC so we could experience what was happening and be on Black Lives Matter Plaza, and for me to see how people outside of Louisville were reacting to Breonna Taylor, and talk about that, because I didn't think things were happening in the way they should be in Louisville. So I was trying to show the difficulty of just living in that moment, and how do we even talk about something like this, but it might be hard to discuss, but we've got to do the talking, and we've got to start talking to each other. And so that was the idea. And hopefully that came across in the piece. It meant a lot for me to do that. I'm about to go back to DC soon. That's going to be one of the places I do research, but that'll be the first time back since last summer when I wrote that. Yeah, so that's going to be like...
it's going to be one of those moments like what we started out talking about, where it's like you're in the place and it's a different version of itself, but hopefully some resonance from those echoes from before is still out there resonating somewhere. It fucking better be. I guess they're gonna have to edit that word out maybe, but
yeah, man. I mean, it's going to be a trip, so it's, me and my partner again going back to, to experience DC, and I'm researching and she's taking pictures, and we're going back into that space again, right? It's two artists, two poets going back into the space. Like, what's that going to be like, it's so many things. But I feel like, we're here to make people think. I always tell people that artists improve the quality of life and the communities that they occupy. And then hopefully when other people outside their community see that, it kind of ripples, out and touches other people. So, that's what we're here for, man. Not, it's not that it's easy, but, not asking for it to be easy, just enjoying the experience and being here to make it happen,
Oh man, well, thank you so much for sharing your thought-provoking work with us. Is there anything coming up that you want to make sure that people know about, or is it mostly things coming up that you want to make sure that people don't know too much about?
Yeah, just me. Yeah, things that you're probably going to see me in these cities I wasn't supposed to name, and no, I mean, it's going to be good, man. It's just the research summer. A former collaborator of mine, filmmaker named David Flores. There might be some, I don't know. Me and David are crazy together. We had a little music project called The Computer Will Never Kill a long time ago.
That's an amazing name.
It's totally stolen from Jim James in My Morning Jacket, another fellow Kentucky person.
Oh, so there you go.
Jim James probably knows the significance of that quote, but it's something he said, and as soon as he said it, I was just like, "That's it," and we ran with it. So there might be more of our stuff coming in different ways, but yeah, man, they're just it's kind of fun to have friends that make music and make films. And get inspired by all that stuff,
Yeah.
So good summer, man. It was so good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, always. Likewise. Yeah, always. And again, soon, hopefully. Take good care of yourself, and until soon. Yeah.
You too, man. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a good one.